The world thought it had seen the worst. But even as Europe struggled to recover from the First World War, the shadows of a new conflict were growing. Nations were weakened, economies shattered, and millions of ordinary people were struggling just to survive. In the midst of this fragile calm, leaders with dangerous ambitions were plotting, and the stage was being set for a war that would engulf the globe. This is the story of World War II, not just of tanks, guns, and battles, but of humanity itself, a story of courage and cowardice, heroism and horror, and the choices that shaped the fate of millions. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany humiliated, stripped of territory. Burdened with crippling reparations and politically unstable, the nation was a powder keg. Across Europe, borders had shifted, and resentment simmered. Meanwhile, Italy under Mussolini embraced fascism, and Japan looked east, hungry for resources and power. Peace was fragile. Every decision, every act of diplomacy or appeasement would ripple through the coming decade. Ordinary people lived in fear and uncertainty. Economies were collapsing. Families struggled to put food on the table, and yet, amid this despair, some saw opportunity. Opportunists, radicals, and ideologues began to rise. In Germany, a man named Adolf Hitler began to capture the imagination of a desperate nation. Charismatic, manipulative, and utterly ruthless, Hitler promised a return to greatness. By 1933, he became Chancellor of Germany. His rise was swift, aided by economic collapse and political chaos. But his vision was not just for Germany. It was for conquest. Hitler's ideology was one of domination, racial hierarchy, and relentless expansion. Within 6 years, his ambitions would plunge the entire world into war. Hitler moved carefully at first. Austria was annexed in the Anschluss of 1938, and soon after, he demanded the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Britain and France, desperate to avoid conflict, agreed. The Munich Agreement was celebrated as peace, but it was a dangerous illusion. Hitler saw weakness, not compromise. By March 1939, he had taken Czechoslovakia entirely, signaling that diplomacy alone could no longer contain him. Europe was on the brink. The war had not yet started, but the countdown had begun. On September 1, 1939, Germany unleashed a new kind of warfare, blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tanks, planes, and infantry moved in perfect coordination, overwhelming Polish defenses. Cities fell, armies were encircled, and civilians fled in terror. Within weeks, Poland was conquered, and Europe's descent into chaos had begun. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but for Poland it was already too late. In 1940, Germany turned west. France, a nation long considered a symbol of European strength, fell in a matter of weeks. German forces marched triumphantly into Paris, while British troops evacuated at Dunkirk in a desperate rescue operation. Fear spread across the continent. Hitler's army seemed unstoppable, and the world watched in shock as history unfolded. But the story was far from over. Courage and resilience still lingered in the hearts of those who refused to surrender. By the summer of 1940, Germany had conquered much of Western Europe, but Britain remained defiant. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, launched relentless bombing raids, targeting cities, factories, and military installations. The skies over London, Coventry, and other cities were filled with fire and smoke. The Royal Air Force, though vastly outnumbered, fought with courage and skill. Pilots known as the Few became legends, engaging in dogfights that would decide the fate of the nation. Civilians slept in underground stations, listening to the roar of bombs and the wail of air raid sirens. And yet, Britain held. Against all odds, the island nation withstood the storm, proving that resilience and determination could turn the tide even against overwhelming force. While Europe burned, a different kind of war raged under the relentless sun of North Africa. German General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, led the Africa Corps with brilliant tactics and audacious maneuvers. The Allies, led by British and later American forces, struggled to push back the German-Italian armies. Battles were fought across endless deserts, where tanks clashed in swirling sandstorms and soldiers endured punishing heat by day and freezing nights. Supply lines were lifelines, and every advance was costly. Slowly, the Allies learned from their mistakes. By late 1942 and 1943, victories at El Alamein and Tunisia began to turn the tide in the desert, opening the path to invade Italy. In 1943, Allied forces launched the invasion of Sicily, then mainland Italy. Mussolini's fascist regime began to crumble under military pressure and public dissent. The Italian people, weary of war and oppression, began to resist. Italian cities became battlefields, but also places of quiet heroism. Civilians helped hide Jews and partisans, supplied the Allies with intelligence, and fought in resistance movements that would continue until the war's end. Italy's fall showed that even regimes built on fear could collapse when courage and perseverance intersected. In Asia, Japan pursued its imperial ambitions aggressively. By 1941, the Japanese Empire controlled vast swathes of China and Southeast Asia. The United States, alarmed at Japan's aggression, imposed sanctions, but diplomacy failed. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The destruction was immense. Battleships sunk, planes destroyed, thousands of lives lost. America, previously hesitant, was now fully drawn into the war. The conflict had become truly global, stretching across oceans and continents. While armies clashed, Hitler's genocidal machine was in full swing. The Holocaust claimed the lives of 6 million Jews, alongside millions of Romani people, disabled individuals, political prisoners, and countless others. Concentration camps became centers of horror, where humanity's darkest instincts were unleashed. But even in these shadows, acts of courage and defiance emerged. Prisoners helped each other survive, resistance movements smuggled information to the outside world, and ordinary citizens risked everything to hide and save lives. The Holocaust remains a stark reminder of the depths of cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit. The war on the Eastern Front was merciless. Hitler's army invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, expecting a swift victory. Instead, they met fierce resistance, extreme weather, and the vastness of the Soviet land. Cities became fortresses, and Stalingrad became the epicenter of human suffering and determination. For months, soldiers fought street by street, building by building. Freezing temperatures and relentless combat decimated both sides. In February 1943, the Soviet forces encircled the Germans, forcing their surrender. Stalingrad marked a turning point, the first major defeat for Hitler, and the beginning of the slow pushback that would eventually liberate Eastern Europe. In the Pacific, the tide of war turned at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. The United States Navy, using intelligence breakthroughs and daring tactics, destroyed much of Japan's carrier fleet. This victory stopped Japanese expansion and shifted the momentum in favor of the Allies. From this point, the Allies began their island-hopping campaign, reclaiming territory one island at a time, inching closer to Japan's home islands. Every step forward came at great cost, with fierce resistance from Japanese forces determined to defend their homeland. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Over 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy in a meticulously planned operation. Soldiers waded through water, faced barbed wire and machine gun fire, and advanced under intense bombardment. Thousands were killed or wounded in those first hours, yet the operation succeeded. From the beaches, the Allies pushed inland, liberating towns and cities under the watchful eyes of grateful civilians. France, Belgium, and eventually the Netherlands were freed. The Allied advance marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany in Western Europe. December 1944. Hitler launched a desperate counterattack through the Ardennes, hoping to split the Allied forces and recapture momentum. Known as the Battle of the Bulge, it became the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States during the war. Soldiers endured freezing temperatures, snow, and relentless enemy fire. Villages were destroyed, and civilians were caught in the crossfire. Despite initial German gains, Allied forces regrouped, and the offensive ultimately failed. The battle exhausted German resources and marked the last major German push in the West. By April 1945, Allied forces were closing in on Berlin from the west, while Soviet forces advanced from the east. German cities lay in ruins, factories destroyed, and millions of civilians suffering. Hitler, realizing the war was lost, took his own life in his bunker on April 30th, 1945. Shortly after, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Europe once again was free, but at a staggering cost. Millions of lives lost, cities destroyed, and societies forever scarred. While Europe celebrated victory, the war in the Pacific raged on. Battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa were some of the bloodiest in the Pacific theater. Japanese forces fought to the death, often using kamikaze attacks to inflict maximum damage. The Allies pressed on, but the human cost was tremendous. Every island gained brought the Allies closer to Japan, but also reminded the world that war had no mercy, and victory always came at a price. August 1945. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Cities were obliterated within moments, tens of thousands of lives lost instantly, and many more in the following weeks from radiation. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. World War II was finally over. The atomic bomb had not only ended the war, but also ushered humanity into a new, terrifying era, the Atomic Age. While soldiers fought on distant battlefields, civilians endured hardships at home. In Europe and Asia, rationing became a part of daily life. Families scavenged for food, workers labored around the clock in factories, and women entered roles traditionally held by men, keeping economies and industries afloat. Civilians also risked their lives to resist occupation. In France, Poland, and Norway, underground movements gathered intelligence, sabotaged enemy operations, and helped hide persecuted families. These unsung heroes played a pivotal role in the fight for freedom. World War II was also a war of shadows. Intelligence operations determined the outcome of countless battles. At Bletchley Park in England, codebreakers worked tirelessly to decrypt the German Enigma machine, providing the Allies with invaluable information. Spies risked everything to deliver intelligence behind enemy lines. From the French resistance to American and British operatives in Nazi-occupied Europe, their courage saved thousands of lives and turned the tide in critical moments. The war accelerated innovation at an unprecedented pace. Tanks, fighter jets, radar, and rockets transformed how battles were fought. Medical advancements, from penicillin to improved surgical techniques, saved countless lives. And yet, the development of the atomic bomb demonstrated that human ingenuity could create both life-saving technologies and instruments of mass destruction. Millions were uprooted from their homes, cities in ruins, families scattered, and entire populations forced into exile. Refugee camps became temporary homes, where people endured disease, hunger, and uncertainty. Despite these hardships, communities rebuilt, forged solidarity, and showed remarkable resilience. The human spirit endured, even when everything familiar was lost. After the war, the world sought justice. The Nuremberg trials brought Nazi leaders to account for crimes against humanity. For the first time, the international community held individuals responsible for atrocities on such a massive scale. The trials sent a message. Evil would not go unpunished, and humanity had a responsibility to protect itself from tyranny. World War II reshaped the world. Nations rebuilt, borders were redrawn, and new alliances formed. The United Nations emerged, a global attempt to prevent future conflicts. Technology, medicine, and strategy advanced rapidly. But the cost, tens of millions of lives, cities in ruins, and families destroyed, remains staggering. Above all, World War II reminds us of both the darkness and the light within humanity. It is a story of ambition, courage, horror, and hope. It shows that even in the most desperate circumstances, resilience, ingenuity, and moral courage can prevail. This was World War II, the war that changed everything.